Okay, what am I dealing with? Oh no. Yes, it's finally over. So here we are, another very highly requested stand review, and obviously this one is on Gold Experience Requiem. The thing about GER in this game is that it's overpowered. I don't think this is really a question up in the air for anyone that is at the higher levels of play, because, well, it's just kinda nuts. It has a self-heal that's quite good and doesn't have a super long cooldown, a get off me tool / punish tool that does like 45 damage for free that's also a projectile, another projectile that does like 40 damage that can be confirmed off of a barrage, a counter that gets you both of your projectiles, which can do somewhere between 50 and 80 damage, time stop resistance, as well as a move that automatically bails you out of combos, extends your own combos, and cancels a lot of the ultimates in the game. And then to top all of that off, you have an awakening that basically turns you into a Terminator that instantly kills your opponent in 2 or 3 interactions. Long story short, Gold Experience Requiem is nuts, and hands down the most entertaining thing about GER is that bad players have no idea how to use it and think it's awful, which is probably the main reason that it's remained basically in the same state that it's been in for as long as I can remember. GER has always been good. I don't know when it wasn't good, and the introduction of the counter kind of just broke the whole stand for quite a while, and I still don't think it needs the counter, but this is the kind of stuff I would talk about in the conclusion. So let's jump to the moveset before I spoil every single part of the video right at the start. I've already lightly touched on it, but GER's moveset is very, very versatile. Starting things off, we have the Life Beam of Creation, which fires a beam at your crosshair, and it summons 4 scorpions that go directly towards your nearest opponent. The thing about this move is that for whatever reason, it has next to no end lag on it, which means you can use it and then immediately use an attack. That's how you do the aforementioned scorpion barrage that you see people doing all the time. If you just hit the key and then immediately barrage, you'll fire the scorpion beam and then barrage right afterwards, trapping your opponent, forcing them to get hit with all the scorpions. Only problem is, because of the way this move works, certain moves just completely screw up the aiming. Basically, the life beam comes directly out of your stand's hand, and for some reason, certain moves just collide with this hitbox. Next up is the Summon Life Form move, which is pretty similar to the previous move, except for it only brings up one thing out of the ground, and you can't aim it, but it performs exactly the same as the other ones, doing a good chunk of damage. GER also has access to a counter move, which if you manage to land it, stuns the opponent in place, only allowing them to do a barrage and stopping them from moving whatsoever for a pretty decent duration. If you miss the counter though, there is a small amount of end lag on the end of it to where you can get punished, where you're unable to use any of your moves. In the same vein of defensive moves, GER has access to both a self-heal and a team heal move. The team heal in particular has quite a low cooldown, so if you're using this correctly, you can keep your teammates in the fight constantly. It's hands down the most underrated part of GER's kit. Next up is your Summon Tree, which summons a tree underneath your feet, and it also has a small amount of invincibility frames on it, meaning if someone's trying to hit you while you're building the tree, you won't take damage. And the last real move you have for GER is Return to Zero. This move, if you're not getting hit, desummons all the stands around you and cancels any sort of time-related event or dimension-related event, meaning things like time stop, time erase, dimension hop, that kind of stuff. You can also use it while you're being hit in any sort of stun, and it will immediately bail you out, making you invincible for a short duration. And finally, while it's not technically a move, talk about the Awakening, which, as I've said earlier, basically turns you into the Terminator. This ability is crazy. It bumps up your damage considerably, makes you move significantly faster, makes you jump higher, and makes you take less damage. Basically, while you're doing this, everyone's going to run away from you. And with that, that's all the moves, so you can take a look at the skill tree if you'd like. My build is pretty good. I think it's probably the best GER build you can get, personally, but I'm sure there are some things that other people would swap out, and that's fine. Everyone has their own preferences, but personally, this is what I use. With that out of the way, I'll jump to the strategies section. So you want to know how to use GER, huh? Well, I got you covered, because it's really, really easy. You dash, you use the scorpion beam at the ground, and you barrage. And you do that over and over and over and over again, and you win the game. I know some of you think I'm joking right now, and I'm honestly kind of not. That's pretty true. No, but in all seriousness, this does work. When it comes down to getting the most damage, this is how you're gonna do it. GER is one of the few stands in the entire game where you consistently barrage first, and it will work almost every single time. Reason being, you can use Return to Zero to bail yourself out of getting comboed after the enemy barrages. Here's what I tend to do personally. Use the Scorpion barrage so that they barrage you back. Wait a little bit until their barrage is almost over. Then use the Return to Zero at the end of the barrage, and then zoom punch them, and now you've got a combo for them supposedly comboing you. A lot of better players are going to catch on to this for the second or third time and start blocking you, but let's be real here, most of the people playing YBA are just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again and continue losing to this. So I would say on about 95% of players, probably a higher percentage than that, you can get away with the Return to Zero zoom punch, and they're never going to catch on. As for doing this while your Return to Zero is not on cooldown, I would be careful. It really depends on what you're going up against. Obviously, if you're fighting something like the Hand, you don't want to be ever doing this unless you have Return to Zero, otherwise you're going to eat half your health. But if you're going up against a stand that does not have a solid punish game and is not going to be able to punish you too hard off of a barrage, then I wouldn't worry too much about it. Never mind the fact that if your enemy is trying to do anything that isn't a true combo, you always have your counter. But I'll get there. If you keep doing this damage trading method over and over again, your opponent will likely die. And even if they have a higher DPS stand than you when it comes to destructive power, because of your self-heal, you'll still out-heal them. Speaking of this self-heal, you should always use your self-heal when it's off of cooldown, as long as it's going to heal you for even a little bit of health. I said this in my Gold Experience review, and I believe my The World Over Heaven review as well, but the longer you wait to use your healing, the less healing you're gonna get in the long run. Sure, it feels good to be at lower than half health, use your healing, and then get to half health, but if you just used it earlier, then you would be able to get to about 3/4 health. That's just how cooldowns work. But anyways, I said I was going to talk about the counter, so let's talk about the counter. The counter should not really be a part of Gold Experience Requiem whatsoever, but it is, and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. There's a few basically guaranteed ways to get counters, and I'll list them off right now. Hands down, the easiest way to get a counter off is if someone's using very predictable projectiles. Anything that comes from Killer Queen is an easy counter. Explosive clones from D4C Love Train are easy counters. Any life forms from the other Gold Experiences or Gold Experience Requiems are a counter. Any of that predictable stuff. You can also get away with it by holding block when people are M1ing you, and then waiting for them to try to use a block breaking move, and then countering that. If you're not going up against someone with boxing or pluck, then you can react to any of their unparryable block breaks and just counter them for it. As for what you should do when you land the counter, well, you should use both your life forms and then a zoom punch if you're using Haman. Always use the scorpions first and then the bird because of how the end lag works for both of those moves, and then just mash zoom punch. You need to be really fast for this, and unfortunately a lot of the time the scorpions will just decide they want to go to the moon because, well, it's not consistent at all, and I hope one of these days that gets fixed, but that probably won't happen. But regardless, if you land a counter, you're going to do a ton of damage to the enemy. Now moving on to the bird, which I haven't talked about very much, honestly. I included it a few times in the previous strategies, but there are some practical uses for it. This move can get canceled, but it seems like it's kind of a crapshoot whether it gets canceled or not when you're getting punched, and honestly, it's a really good defensive option. If someone's being hyper aggressive, if you dash back and use the bird, they're probably going to get hit by it. I mean, it's easily reactable, but like I said earlier, most people are bad, so they're just going to tank this damage. And considering there's just about zero reason to use it outside of this, since it's so unbelievably easy to avoid or block, you might as well use it in these scenarios, otherwise you're never going to use it at all. The tree is interesting because it has quite a few practical uses. First of all, like I said earlier, it has iframes on it. It's not quite enough invincibility to avoid some of the longer lasting hitboxes in the game, but it is plenty to avoid some attacks. Things like the world's last hit on his kick barrage are easily avoided by using the tree. Never mind the fact that while you're up there, a lot of stands just can't go up there to catch you, so you get to sit up there and pose for free. And if your enemy tries to pose, you can try to pepper them with projectiles while they're trying. The last thing I should say about the tree is that it's a block break, so there's a few uses for this. Number one is if for some reason you don't have a true block break, this is a true block break that can't be parried, so you can try to break someone's block with it. It's not super practical for that purpose, but you can do it. And the other thing is, because of this block breaking nature, it makes it very easy to heal your teammates. If you just have your buddy block and then build a tree under them, it'll bring them up with you without knocking them to the stratosphere. And since they're block broken, they can't run away from you and accidentally avoid your heal, so you can basically heal them for free with the tree. Now, the only thing I haven't really covered so far is, well, Terminator mode, the Awakening. Gold Experience Requiem's Awakening is just like all your other expendable cooldowns. You should use it right away as soon as possible. I fall victim to not doing this all the time because I'm an idiot. Don't be like me. Use it as soon as possible so that you can use it more than once. The longer you wait, the longer you're gonna have to wait later. So just use the move. While it's active, you just have to play like a crackhead. Do a lot of stupid things constantly. Because of your damage reduction, you can take a lot of hits, and since it buffs up your healing too, you can heal back those hits very easily. You need to turn it into a war of attrition that you basically cannot lose. Something as simple as a barrage trade is going to be a winning interaction for you. And if it's a Scorpion barrage trade, then your enemies lost more than half their health probably. It's really good, and you just need to use it, because the longer it sits there, the less likely you are to actually get anything off of it. One last thing I want to note in strategies is a nifty little trick I learned recently. I don't really think it has too much practical use, honestly, but it's a cool little tech to practice. Basically, since Return to Zero doesn't really have end lag for moves, and your Scorpion doesn't have end lag for moves, if you time your things correctly, you can do dash, Return to Zero, Scorpions, and barrage. Now I know you're thinking, what the hell's the point of that? That's not going to do you any good, you're just doing that anyway. But no, it actually does have a purpose. If you manage to land all of this, it'll disable their stand, which doesn't happen if you use it while stunned. In other words, you get the full combo against a standless opponent, which is pretty helpful. This trick isn't exactly easy considering all the keys you have to press on the keyboard, and for me personally, I have to do a really awkward grip to pull it off, but it's really not that hard if you practice it a little bit and your keybinds aren't too all over the place. The reason I say it's not super practical is, well, number one, how hard it is to pull off, and number two, because when you use Return to Zero, it stops you in place for a little bit, killing all your momentum. This means that if you clip them with the end of the barrage, they can still walk out of it, and you don't go nearly as far with your dash. So, well, you could just whiff, and if you whiff entirely, then you're losing a lot more on cooldowns and damage than you would have if you just went for the normal Scorpion barrage. It's risky, but it can be beneficial. I'm also just realizing that I forgot to mention that if you want a completely non-committal option, there is the option of doing a zoom punch with the Scorpions, but for some reason, with the way the Scorpions come out and the hitboxes of the way the projectiles interact, it's hard to explain, but basically, if you don't delay the zoom punch a little bit after dashing and using the Scorpions, then 100% of the time, the Scorpions will go backwards. Every single time. Like, you can try it yourself. Hit the X key and then immediately hit your zoom punch. It will always go backwards. I don't know why it does that. It's annoying, and it would make this option a whole lot better if it didn't do that, but it does. So I don't do it very often because of that, but it is worth noting that you can do this if you manage to time it correctly. With that though, I think I'm about wrapping up. I think it goes without saying that you can use your Return to Zero to stop people's time moves. I already mentioned that in the moveset, but well, might as well bring it up here again in case for some reason you haven't figured that out. And I suppose one last thing before we move on is that using your Return to Zero to get combos is a lot better than it is trying to use it to cancel people's time stops and whatnot. I say this because it's extremely easy to avoid TS with GER. If they time stop you, just use a tree and then jump while you're on top of the tree, and you'll freeze way up in the air and they can never get you. Your return to zero is just going to sit there if you're fighting against a TS stand, because they're never going to use their TS, so you'll never be able to use your return to zero to stop it. So you might as well use it to get damage and then just avoid their TS. If you know what you're doing, they won't get any damage anyway. But with that, we're finally done with the strategies, so I can talk about the stand itself, how I feel, and all that other stuff in the conclusion. So this video is already running on 15 minutes, and I really don't want to hit 20 minutes because making these guide kind of videos way too long is going to dissuade people from watching them, considering that you don't want to watch a 20-minute guide to learn how to use something, or at least I assume you wouldn't want to do that. So when it comes to finishing up here, I'm going to try to keep it relatively short. At the beginning of the video, I already mentioned that I think that Gold Experience Requiem is overpowered, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. And the question of how exactly we fix this stand without completely gutting it is the question I'm sure a lot of you have on your minds right now, and I'm going to do my best to answer it. If we think about the main reason that GER is overpowered is the fact that you can get a nuts amount of damage while also having some of the best defensive options in the game. Usually you would want a trade-off of either having really good offensive power and not great defensive power, or the other way around. But with GER, you can get really powerful offensive power on top of having really good defensive power. And I think the main issue probably stems from the Awakening. Now don't get me wrong, the stand itself is nigh invincible if you have a player that knows what they're doing. So when it comes to that, I'm not entirely sure. But what I will tell you is that the Awakening is way too strong. What I would propose is to meet in the middle between the Awakening and the base form. Because when you have the base form, a lot of the time it feels like you could just be poking your opponent and never killing them. But that's not really too much of a problem because of how much defensive options you have. But on the other hand, we don't want just nobody using the stand because it does low damage. So my proposition would be a very slight destructive power increase to the normal form and completely remove the damage increase from the Awakening. I'm talking like 0.1 increase to barrage and I don't know, like 1 or 2 damage to the rest of the moves, that kind of buff, and completely gut the Awakening, because the Awakening is just a problem. The Awakening basically just automatically obliterates you if you fight against it, and it really encourages two not enjoyable styles of play. Obviously, if you're fighting against the Awakening, you don't want to get anywhere close, so you want to stall it out. So you run away for like 30 minutes until their Awakening runs down. And if you're on the other end, then you're just playing a crackhead and running at the person, and if they decide to fight you, they automatically lose. Both of these decisions don't really scream great game design, and so that's why I would say that making it so that you can actually fight GER when they're awakened isn't such a bad idea. And you also have to consider that the damage reduction that you get is more than enough to compensate when you use the Awakening. It really doesn't need this massive damage buff. So if it were up to me, that's probably what I would do. I would also remove the counter entirely, but I think that's already been pretty well established that that's not going to happen. Outside of that, I've seen plenty of people say to decrease the amount of damage that your life forms do and all this other stuff, and I think what I'm worrying about is that they'll just turn the stand into a complete pea shooter, and I don't think that's a good idea. At the end of the day, I hate using this argument, but GER is technically, as far as I'm aware, the strongest JoJo stand. So turning it into completely worthless would leave a really poor taste in I think really everyone's mouth. The one last change that I don't think would make too much of a difference, so I think they should do it and should really apply it to all the healing moves in the game, is that healing should not scale with damage reduction, damage increases, any of that. It should be a flat rate all the time. This meaning if someone awakens and uses a Haman buffed heal, they don't heal themselves for 80 HP, and on the contrary, if you're healing yourself or someone else, you don't get screwed by your own damage resistances. The fact that boxing just gets less healing from healing sources is really stupid at the end of the day. So they should really all act like the world over heaven and ignore all passives completely. Other than that though, that's my thoughts on GER. I'm sure there's a laundry list of ways people have to fix this stand, and if you have them and you think they're better than mine, I'm more than welcome to hearing them, because honestly I'm curious. I don't know any ways other than the ways I've listed without completely gutting the stand. So whatever you have to say about it, feel free to leave it in the comments. Hopefully I'll read it, and if you see something you agree with, make sure you upvote download it so that I have a higher likelihood of seeing it. With that all being said, I think I went overtime anyway. God damn it. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you next time.